adults. LGBTQ candidates experienced higher rates. The death of 16-year-old non-binary student Next Benedict has stirred outrage across the country. The media is blaming this tragedy on Oklahoma's anti-trans laws, the Education Board, including State Superintendent Ryan Walters, and yours truly. Politicians, activists, and groomers are using this incident to drive a false narrative that LGBTQ people are under attack. They're covering up the reality of what actually happened. So let's dive in, expose some of these narratives, and uncover the actual reality of this tragedy. Next Benedict, formerly known as Dagny Benedict, was a 16-year-old who identified as non-binary. She was a high school student from Oklahoma. On February 7, 2024, she was involved in a fight at school. She had an altercation with a group of girls in the school bathroom. According to school administrators, the fight took place when the girls were in the bathroom for, quote, less than 2 minutes before other students and employees broke up the fight. Following the incident, the school nurse reported, quote, all students involved in the altercation walked under their own power to the assistant principal's office and nurse's office. 2 hours after the fight, Next was interviewed in a local hospital by a school resource officer from the Owasso Police Department. Next claimed that 3 unknown girls randomly started picking on her and her friend because of the way they were dressed. Next was not happy with their remarks and decided to pour water on them, which sparked an altercation. Next did not seem traumatized or dealing with serious injuries in the interview and was later discharged from the hospital. In a text message to a friend, Next described her injuries as, quote, scrapes and bruises. The next afternoon, Next's grandmother, Sue Benedict, called 911 requesting immediate medical attention. Reporting that Next was short on breath, medical professionals arrived on the scene and Next was rushed to a local hospital where she was pronounced dead. The mainstream media jumped on this tragedy to drive a false narrative, blaming the bathroom confrontation as a primary cause of the tragic death, sparking unproved conspiracies about a hate crime, Oklahoma's anti-trans laws, and right-wing influence. For weeks, the media aired unproven narratives as LGBTQ activists demanded changes to Oklahoma's anti-trans legislature and blamed me for Next's death. More than a month after her death, the autopsy report was released, shattering all the disinformation the self-proclaimed fact-checkers had spread. The report revealed that Next had overdosed on a combination of substances. Handwritten notes suggestive of self-harm were found in Benedict's bedroom. The teenager had a history of bipolar disorder, depression, anxiety, and self-harm, and that her tragic death was not caused by the infamous bathroom confrontation, but by an overdose. It was ruled as a suicide. We later learned that Dagny, at the age of 9, was repeatedly raped and molested by her own father. Her father, James Everett Hughes, was arrested for raping a minor on July 31st, 2019 in Sebastian County, Arkansas. The media conveniently ignored these disturbing details from Dagny's life. They rushed to drive a false narrative, blaming the bathroom confrontation and a series of other influences for her tragic death. Prominent politicians and activists parroted the lies and used this incident to push the false narrative that LGBTQ people are somehow under attack. Dagny became a social justice icon for the trans movement, a trans George Floyd. Her name and false narrative painted about her death were quickly pushed for political outrage. There were memorials, marches, protests, and the President of the United States even put out a statement. Her lifelong suffering was exploited with lies to drive an agenda that fuels monsters like James Everett Hughes, causing mental anguish and confusion about one's gender identity. Rather than addressing the underlying mental health issues, the media rushed to conclusions and attempted to paint an alternate picture of reality. A 2009 study from the UCLA School of Public Health found that LGBTQ individuals are twice as likely as heterosexual men and women to seek help from mental health professionals. 48.5% of LGBTQ individuals reported receiving treatment in the past year, compared with 22.5% of heterosexuals. Another study from the American Urological Association, published in 2021, found the rates of psychiatric emergencies in individuals were high both before and after gender-altering surgery. It further concluded that the attempted suicide rates among people who identified as transgender more than doubled after receiving a vaginoplasty. To add to this disturbing pattern, another study published in 2021 in the American Academy of Pediatrics found disparities in childhood abuse between transgender and non-transgender adolescents. 73% of transgender adolescents reported psychological abuse. 39% reported physical abuse, and 19% reported sexual abuse. Compared with heterosexual adolescents, transgender adolescents had higher odds of psychological abuse, physical abuse, and sexual abuse. Within separate subgroup analysis, transgender males and non-binary adolescents had higher odds of reporting psychological abuse than cisgender adolescents. And finally, in a recent study from 2022, researchers at Vanderbilt found that 83% of lesbian, gay, bisexual, and queer individuals reported going through adverse childhood experiences such as sexual and emotional abuse and worse mental health as adults when compared to their heterosexual peers. Of the nearly 3,000 LGBTQ individuals surveyed, 83% of LGBTQ adults experienced at least one adverse childhood experience compared to 64% of straight adults. More than half, 52% of LGBTQ adults reported 3 or more adverse childhood experiences compared to 26% of straight adults. LGBTQ candidates experienced higher rates of each of the 8 defined types of adverse childhood experiences. So, to summarize, the chances that people who identify as LGBTQ were also abused as a child are very high. This is not a coincidence. In just under a decade, the LGBTQ lobby has hijacked all major institutions and has overtaken prominent cultures, political parties, corporations, military, federal government, state governments, academia, medicine, entertainment. Everyone in a position of power is in support of the self-proclaimed oppressed and marginalized movement. This sudden change is not just a deviation from natural reality, but an evil force that is destroying our culture and society. The mainstream media, with the help of powerful Marxist institutions, is leading this movement. They are misleading vulnerable children to a path of lifelong suffering. Next Benedict was a victim of this manipulation and brainwashing. Her childhood trauma and mental health issues were intentionally covered up to drive a narrative, and her tragic death was exploited to spread nationwide outrage and hatred.